Modern-day mafia captivates crime enthusiasts. Many decades ago, the media was filled with stories and headlines surrounding these polarizing figures. These days, the mafia is still operating, but its world of organized crime is much different than it used to be. For one, modern-day mobsters aim to stay under the radar. Mafia associates no longer vanish into thin air when they've crossed arrival. Instead, these gangs resort to methods that keep them off the media's radar. What mesmerizes us about modern-day mafia families is how their criminal empires have expanded. They're still involved in traditional activities like loan sharking and extortion, but they've also adapted to the digital world and have carried out phishing and malware schemes, among other internet crimes. In today's video, we're going to take a look at how the mafia has evolved over the years. We'll take a trip back through mafia history and explore some of the modern crimes that keep these organizations going. Stay tuned as we navigate through this mysterious world. Before we can delve into the modern-day mafia world, we need to take a step back and revisit its history. The origins of the mafia date back to the 19th century, but originally, a mafioso wasn't a person connected to the world of organized crime. The word was used to describe someone who was suspicious of central authority. As true crime and history buffs explore the stories of famous mafia families, many of their roots trace back to Sicily. Prior to the mafia starting, Sicily was facing its own troubles. Foreign invaders kept trying to take over the island. Families on the island would form clans to protect their land. It got to the point where these clans would carry out their own line of justice as they saw fit, in secret of course. With all the chaos, opportunity arose. Groups known as Mafia at the time took advantage of the violence in Sicily. They began to extort money from landowners in exchange for protection. In the 1860s, the Italian government began to establish itself in Sicily. Things weren't easy for them as the island was filled with crime. But by the 1870s, the government realized that if you couldn't beat them, you might as well join them. They enlisted mafia clans to take down independent and dangerous criminals. Initially, the government thought this would be a temporary solution to the problem, but it only provided the mafia a way to expand their power. The 1920s were a key decade in mafia history. A new prime minister came into power, enforcing a tougher crackdown on mafia activity. Prohibition also took place in this era. This gave the mafia room to establish bootlegging activities in the US. With the rise of bootlegging also came the rise of powerful and charismatic dons. Al Capone was one of the most notorious figures of this era. He was the leader of the Chicago outfit during the Prohibition. He was the main force in illegal liquor distribution and was also known for his ruthless tactics. In 1931, the five families formed in New York. The Genovese, Lucchese, Gambino, Colombo, and Bonanno families became part of the organization after the Castellamarese War, one of the bloodiest power struggles in American mafia history. Prohibition eventually came to an end, but mafia families had no intentions of stopping their activities. In fact, they had only furthered their operations. They were involved in many types of organized crime, including drug trafficking, prostitution rings, illegal gambling, loan sharking, extortion, and many other criminal activities. This also began a reign of terror. Many ruthless figures began to emerge, each one with a vision of having the ultimate mafia legacy. Some mob bosses made their mark in history by maintaining traditional mafia values and furthering themselves in the business world. Others became notorious for using violence to make it to the top. Violence in the mafia went hand in hand throughout the 1900s, especially from the 1950s through the 1980s. These crime families had some of the best hitmen working for them. If someone did a mafioso wrong, they would be added to the hitmen's list. Mafia killers were notorious for making people disappear without a trace. Many of the murders they executed still remain unsolved. Back then, it didn't take much to get on a mafia family's kill list, but things are much different today. Over the decades, there has been a major step forward in the crackdown on mafia activity. In order to stay off the radar, mafia organizations are making low-key moves. Murder draws too much attention, so they rarely resort to it anymore. These days, everything is digitalized. Even mafia activity is starting to steer towards the cyber world. The mafia has been able to further its criminal activities using the World Wide Web in several ways. From phishing scams to SIM swapping, a skilled criminal can take advantage of the right target. In 2021, police in Europe arrested over 100 people who were connected to a mafia organization. As authorities were uncovering traditional gang crimes, like drug trafficking and extortion, they uncovered something deeper. The mafia has hired hackers to pull off online crimes, one of them being sending malware to people in order to take over their bank accounts. Back in 2020, when the world was on lockdown during the COVID-19 pandemic, a Russian group called Evil Corp took advantage of organizations working digitally. They would hack organizations and take over their systems, all of this while demanding millions of dollars in ransom money. These attacks have prompted a lot of online-based companies to increase their security measures. But one of the most insane cyber attacks happened back in 2014. In November 2014, Sony Pictures was preparing for the release of an upcoming movie, The Interview. This was a fictional movie about a pair of journalists who landed an interview with Kim Jong-un. They are contacted by the Central Intelligence Agency and hired to kill him. Now, this movie was a comedy with Seth Rogen and James Franco. It wasn't meant to be taken as a serious story, but the North Korean government did have an issue with it, especially in the scene where Kim Jong-un gets killed. Earlier in the year, they issued a letter to Sony requesting the movie be stopped. However, Sony went on with the movie anyway. Things took an unexpected turn on November 24, 2014. A group of hackers called Guardians of Peace hacked into Sony's corporate network. They took terabytes of information, making sure to delete each file off of Sony's computers. They also left messages warning the employees that if they didn't follow the group's demands, they would start leaking the files. That's exactly what happened over the next few weeks. The hackers released 5 movies, 4 of which had yet to be released in cinemas. It wasn't just the movies that got released. Thousands of confidential files were also released. Sony was planning to release The Interview on December 25th. As the date approached, the Guardians of Peace started to focus their messages on it. After messages demanding the movie not be released, one came through reminding Sony of the September 11th terrorist attacks. While these threats were uncredible, they were enough to scare the people involved in the film, especially the 2 main actors. They canceled the movie's promotional tour and pulled it from cinemas. However, this was met with backlash, so Sony decided to air the movie in select independent theaters and across video-on-demand platforms. The files that were leaked by the hackers contained personal information, including social security numbers. Several employees ended up suing Sony over their negligence in proper data protection. Sony ended up having to pay nearly $8 million. Many of the most powerful mafia figures have criminal empires. They didn't turn crime into an empire by sticking to one location. They have expanded their reach and influence through globalization. The further they can expand their networks, the more businesses and enterprises they can infiltrate. For example, the 'Ndrangheta ran one of the most powerful cocaine trafficking rings in Europe. This drug operation extended across 8 European countries, Panama, and Brazil. Federal prosecutors described it as the largest drug operation that's ever been carried out across Europe. The police ended up staging an operation which brought 132 people into custody. As authorities further investigated this mafia family, they discovered the criminal organization had expanded to over 40 countries. Drug trafficking was their main source of operation, but the mafia also dealt with trafficking of illegal waste, extortion, money laundering, and other high-paying crimes. Drug cartels are known to expand their criminal enterprises to further their global reach. They are quick to adapt to any changes or interruptions that could shake their flow. Take the Sinaloa cartel, for example. This Mexican drug cartel is known for its global reach. They would supply drugs to Europe, South America, and other parts of the world. During the global pandemic, when travel restrictions were tight, they had to rework how they distributed the drugs. Air travel was off limits, and driving across the border was risky because authorities had more time to search what was coming in and out. So the Sinaloa cartel had to rework their plan. They relied on vessels and other forms of sea travel to transport drugs. Before the travel restrictions came into effect, the cartel shipped out the supply several times a week. Once the restrictions were in place, shipments slowed down to once a week. The world of business and the mafia are more connected than a lot of people realize. After all, the mafia has a long-standing history of using legitimate businesses as a cover for other activities. What may look like a small local business on the outside could really be a front for money laundering or other schemes. When the Bonanno family boss Michael Lenos Mancuso was released from prison in 2019, there was a condition that he wasn't allowed to participate in any mafia-related activity. However, this didn't last long. He found himself getting sent back to prison for another 11 months. So what did he do? He was caught using his girlfriend's eyeglass shop as a meeting ground for mafia members to engage in illegal activity. Throughout tapped phone calls, authorities heard him talking about mafia business. It's also common for mobsters to carry out fraudulent actions within the construction industry. They are known to infiltrate labor unions, take control of supplies, and carry out extortion schemes. In 2021, members of the Gambino family were arrested for carrying out a bribery scheme on a construction company that scammed hundreds of thousands of dollars, among many other criminal offenses. It's not just small businesses that have been a front for mafia activity. The Banca della Mafia scandal laundered billions of dollars through a bank. The Italian Mafia used an IT entrepreneur as the brains behind an operation, and he networked with corrupt bankers to move the money around. Mafias can help establish their operations by infiltrating legitimate businesses. This has been damaging the economy while keeping the underworld of crime thriving. Legitimate businesses are being set up to avoid taxes while turning dirty money clean. Law enforcement has had a long string of challenges when it comes to putting a stop to mafia crimes. But no matter how efficient law enforcement is, it never seems to be enough. After all, mafia families are very powerful, not just within their criminal organizations either. They are known to establish relationships with the right people. Although laws have become stricter and crackdowns have become stronger, the mafia still continues to operate. Authorities have had to be proactive with their approaches. Many efforts throughout the years have proven to be effective, like surveillance, offering plea deals to informants, and seizing assets. But you have to remember, the most notorious mafia figures are very intelligent. They have discovered ways to stay a step ahead of authorities. Let's take Semyon Mogilevich, for example. He has been on the FBI's most wanted list, but still remains a free man. Why is this? He has made deals with the right people. One of his longtime allies is Russian politician Vladimir Putin. Russia and the US don't have a treaty agreement, so as long as Semyon is living in Russia under Vladimir Putin's protection, the FBI can't touch him. Law enforcement has also placed a higher focus on cybercrimes. Mafia families have enlisted the help of skilled hackers to scam people and businesses out of millions of dollars. Interpol organized Project Gateway to address the increasing problem of cybercrime. They even enlisted international law enforcement for this project. A 24/7 communication system was developed for national cybercrime units, and all member countries were encouraged to cooperate with it. Technology has also helped law enforcement track mafia activities. One efficient way is through blockchain activity. Many criminals were attracted to the blockchain because of its resiliency. They could make and receive anonymous payments without involving a centralized bank. However, law enforcement have been able to analyze blockchain data to track the crypto trail associated to organized crime. Just as the mafia has enlisted IT experts, so have authorities. These experts can use advanced analytics tools to spot patterns and connections. This has helped authorities zone in on criminal networks and build cases against cybercrime. Mafia organizations have been resilient since the beginning of time. Originally, mobsters were clans formed to protect their land from invaders. They would keep their families protected while seeking out their own forms of justice. While mafia activities have changed throughout the years, the values remain the same. As society moves forward, so does mafia activity. Mobsters don't commit crimes for the thrill of it. Each crime they are responsible for is connected to a price tag. If they want to keep money coming into their organizations, they need to adapt to new methods of obtaining it. In the 1950s, it was common for mafia leaders to have a skilled hitman by their side. These days, the leaders have traded hitmen for hackers and IT experts. After all, the internet has presented many ways for the mafia to pull off scams for profit. One of the things that captivates us about mafia organizations is their resilience. They have always found ways to be several moves ahead of the people trying to take their organizations down. This wraps up our story on how the mafia has evolved. From bootlegging alcohol to hacking major studios, the mafia will always find new ways to keep its empire growing. Do you think law enforcement will ever be able to put an end to organized crime? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. That's all for now. Click like, share, and subscribe to see more Mafia Mystique content.